Welcome to a new episode of the Analytics Experience. Today we're here with Meera Lakhavani, data scientist at Google, and Bruno Carrera.
How are you? Meera, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for taking your time to be with Fernando and I and talk about data science.
My favorite topic. It's good to see you, Alfredo and Bruno. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Of course.
And we were discussing this before starting the episode. Meera, you bring such a good perspective in here because you're the first interview that we had that works in a fan company, but also has worked on a big four company when it comes to consulting. And you have such an amazing resume and experience with many internships that you've done and many topics like nanoscience research and also robotics that we're super excited to have you here. And we want to start asking you, how do you get here? Like,
Exactly.
What was your journey? We have the whole resume, but how do you actually get here?
Oh, it's been a journey. So I've always been interested in science and math. So I kind of decided early on I wanted to pursue engineering. So started on this nanoscience, nanotechnology type journey, which I think is great. Coming from an engineering background, I think it teaches you a really structured way to break down problems. You get some exposure to coding. So that was exciting at that time, but I kind of pivoted my career wanting to do something a little less research based and a little bit more business focused, kind of work with teams and work on more strategic projects. So after doing a handful of kind of different types of engineering internships, I even did some robotics work. I kind of went into management consulting, and I was specifically in the advanced analytics group at PwC. So that was an awesome experience. I think as Bruno and Alfredo, you guys can attest, I think consulting gives you so much exposure to different tools, different types of business problems. And this was great being analytics focused because I was able to work on analytics strategy projects, even predictive model implementation projects, like dashboarding and so on. So I think it was a way to very quickly get exposure to what type of interests companies have with monetizing their data or making sense of their data and what it realistically looks like at some of these large organizations. Started my career in consulting, which was like a blast, and it was just a great way to get exposure. I had some great mentors at that time. I started to take more of an interest in really getting my hands dirty with data and getting to code and be hands-on. And I especially started to get drawn to predictive modeling. Like the way I saw it, I started to feel like you can build these statistical models and you're almost like a fortune teller or something. Like you can anticipate what's going to happen next. You can anticipate customer complaints, work on dynamic pricing. Like there was just I felt like the field was so ripe because the amount of data was growing exponentially. And there was such an appetite for companies to figure out how they can take data and turn it into something valuable, or take data and turn it into something they can anticipate or something they can get ahead of their competition using. I got more interested in predictive modeling. I tried to practice coding as much as possible. I did a lot of the hackathons and a lot of the data science competitions. And that kind of evolved into me saying, hey, consulting's great, but I want to go all in on being a true data scientist and not kind of bounce around between strategy projects and sometimes data projects and sometimes something else. So I took a role specifically in retail analytics and did pure data science for a few years, which I think that was great because consulting, I think, provides a lot of breadth where you get exposure to different industries, different types of problems, different tools. And then I was able to get depth when I was a true data scientist, where you get to go a little bit deeper because you're working with the same data sets for longer periods of time. And you're a little bit more involved with actually not just building a model, not just making recommendations, but actually implementing it, putting it into production and seeing how it runs and maintaining it and testing it and all that good stuff. So I loved that and kind of transitioned to Google a little over a year ago. And Now I'm in more of a consultative role where I work specifically in cloud on the machine learning tools. So helping companies that want to build predictive models, do machine learning and artificial intelligence in cloud, help them understand what's possible and set up some of their pipelines. So that's been my journey. And I think that it's sort of like data science is somewhat of a new and emerging field, which is so beautiful because you've got people from engineering background, people from economics background, stats, and so on. So it's kind of cool, especially listening to your podcast, to see all the diversity of backgrounds that people come from.
Now that you mentioned that, Meera, thank you so much for everything that you just mentioned. Alfredo and I were a good example of that. I came from more finance and business background. Alfredo is more technical background. And we both fought that middle with data and data analytics and data science. Yeah. And one of my questions is going to be this: like, you come from an engineering background and you have all this experience also in consulting. How was the transition from you from all this time developing your technical skills and start developing your communication and soft skills?
Agreed. But also, like, in adding to that, it's so important that you mentioned like all the experience that you got, because it's true. Like, I'm also in consulting and I'm a data science consultant for my company. And you get to experience so many different projects that have nothing to do with them, like with the one that you be before. And you get to see like so many client facing, and you get to see so many different data sets, and you get to like have this sort of like understanding of what data you like to work with and what type of like predictive models you like to work with. Like, I work with a lot of risk management, for example, and I enjoy it. But I think going to Bruno, like, exactly, like, do you think that consulting experience help you out on those soft skills that are also required as a data scientist nowadays?
Absolutely. Yeah. I sometimes I feel like that's my X factor, is that I love being technical. I love being hands-on and coding and doing all that math and stats stuff. But I do think, especially in data science, like, you always need to be able to translate whatever you're doing into the why does this matter? What does this do for the business type of thing? I mean, unless you're on some of these highly technical research teams, then maybe it might be a little bit different. But I do think it's very valuable to have the ability to talk to someone that's not technical, like some stakeholder or some executive, and understand what their priorities are, be able to translate that in a technical way. So I think consulting is super helpful with that, because you kind of get the communication, working with teams, working with people of audiences that might be technical or might not be. So I think it's kind of a balance, because I did have stretches of time where the projects were just not as much hands-on data science, like when you're making decks and doing presentations and this more strategy work. So I think it was just a balance for me of how can I keep my coding skills sharp? And that's why I tried to sign up for as many hackathons as possible. And so that when I wasn't on a hands-on keyboard type of project, I was still able to continue to develop my skills.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of terminology of data science. You mentioned pipelines. You mentioned cloud computing. I'm going to ask you this. Alfredo and I, in previous episodes, we were discussing about cloud computing, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. My question is, what is your take on how cloud computing now is changing the business environments, how people are managing their data?
Yeah, so this is super interesting, because I was actually reading a perspective on how venture capital funding has evolved in the past decade, because prior to cloud computing becoming so ubiquitous and so easy to access, like, it's easy to access your own cloud database storage now and set up your own kind of whatever structure you need to store your data. That's easy now. But maybe 10, 15 years ago, when it was less ubiquitous, your first venture capital funding checks would go towards you buying your own servers and you buying your own whatever infrastructure you needed to get your website running, to start to store your data, to start to process whatever you needed. So I think that now that you don't need this upfront investment to physically house all this computing power, now I think it makes like the fact that cloud computing is bigger now and cheaper makes it so I think innovation is more accessible because I don't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars upfront. I can pay as I go and scale my data storage as I go. So I think it's been exciting. And I think in some ways it democratizes access to technology because it's just not as much of an investment upfront.
And there's so many vendors at the same time, as you were talking about, that I think it's interesting to mention. There's just so many opportunities right now in the market that for companies who might have like a smaller budget than the other ones have access to those servers. As you were saying, like that was a big investment in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's great that I'm obviously pro Google, but it's great that there's competition because I think that we don't really have a monopoly. Like all the cloud providers are great and it can kind of keep the prices reasonable.
Agreed.
I really like that you put an example of finance and venture capitalism because sometimes in other industries, they say they have nothing to do with what is evolving with technology, but actually it's affecting also their industry. And it's a key point to be able to succeed and to maintain being competitive. I think, that's something interesting. The people that are doing business, doing finance, when they listen to these terminologies, they get like, yeah, but I don't do that. Actually, yeah, your firm have to do that. They want to evolve and be better.
That's true. Yeah, I think it's an interesting time. Now there's more and more intersection between tech and data and business. Yeah. Like at this point, it's hard, even in retail, which isn't considered a particularly high-tech industry. Like it's hard to stay ahead if you're not using data science to understand your customers, understand what they want, like do targeted marketing on them. Like you actually are falling behind if you can't integrate tech and integrate like data into what you do business-wise.
Absolutely. And like nowadays, especially every single company is relying on data to be processed, cleaned, analyzed, and then served to real stakeholders, as you was mentioning, as fast as you can. So having access to these like providers, servers in real time, I think is essential for any business who might be like a banking institution or retailer, as you were saying, special retail, that you need to have so much investment on the stock and what you have available or not. Like Amazon is a great example, for example. So yeah, I think that you've made a really good point. And added on to that, how do you think cloud computing might evolve now that we're seeing AI be more integrated?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think on one hand, because I'm more focused on the machine learning space. So there are more APIs and cloud tools available for, I guess, easy access to machine learning models than ever before. So I think that some companies that maybe can't always, or I guess aren't willing to invest in having like a full team of data scientists and machine learning engineers and so on. I think there's more and more out of the box solutions for things like that. So I think it kind of makes predictive modeling and data analysis and even dashboarding a lot more accessible. And I'm super intrigued and I'm trying to learn more about generative networks and start to learn how to build those because I've mostly worked with structured data my whole career, but I think these language models are super interesting and I want to stay sharp on them. So another thing is that I think those types of tools will hopefully start to come into cloud as well. And that will give an opportunity for companies to take unstructured text data or even use some of the generative text development tools to maybe like aid in whatever they're doing. And I think that's already happening a lot with chat bots and customer service bots. But I anticipate that there will be a lot more of that, which hopefully will just make companies be able to run more efficiently. And again, kind of like what we saw with data storage becoming more accessible, hopefully just access to AI and access to data analysis can become more accessible, even if you're a small company that maybe doesn't have all of the human resources, manpower to do that on your own.
Sure, because and obviously you were saying, you bring a really good point. Like NLP, like natural language processing, is growing so much lately that it makes you think, big companies obviously are going to have access to this resources, but what about the small and medium companies that might not have the budget to integrate them? Are they going to fall behind just because they cannot keep up with the competitors? Like I feel like this is a really big topic to make technology as accessible to anyone. Like I think it's going to be huge in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. And how beautiful is that because you don't want to see only the mega giant companies do well. Like we want to see smaller companies be able to have that advantage because that's where a lot of the innovation comes from. Like once companies get so big, are they innovating as much? So I think it's great that there are more and more tools available for smaller companies. And this kind of reminds me that something I like about tech is I think it's more of a meritocracy than more traditional careers have been in the past, where like, I don't know, let's say I was an investment banker or something in the 80s, like you really needed to be polished and you needed to speak a certain way and you needed to have a certain pedigree. And I think that tech is turning into more of a, oh, it doesn't really matter where you went to school. It doesn't really matter if you studied this or that. If you can learn the thing and you're hungry and you know how to code and you know how to solve problems, like there is a space for you here. And I think that it's an interesting parallel between what you were saying, Alfredo, and that kind of like the small dogs can have like be players as well, the same way the smaller people that maybe didn't have as much of a fancy background can be players in tech too.
And I have a question for you. Now that Alfredo and you mentioned all these evolving technologies that are going to come and how competitive the market is, what do you recommend to people that actually want to be competitive and land jobs inside this industry? For example, what do you recommend to people that want to learn about data, people that want to land jobs in the data field?
Especially even women, because I feel like your case is very, very explicit. Because unfortunately, I haven't seen that many people going into engineering until now, that we are seeing more women interested into the field. So I think Bruno brings a really good question on that.
Yeah. So in terms of like staying sharp and landing jobs here, I think whether you're starting out or whether you've been in this industry, you have to always be learning. Like even like whatever machine learning models I was working on 6 years ago, like we don't even use them like they're not even relevant anymore. Not in a bad way. I think that still kind of the guts of what you're doing and like the basics of what you're doing are still relevant, but that's why I'm trying to take classes on generative AI and learn what the new things are, because I think this field is evolving so quickly that you almost have to just assume that the amount, like the information that you don't know is growing at an exponential rate. So I'd say constantly be learning, whether you're early in your career or not. One thing I think is really helpful for landing jobs, which you two are totally nailing, is doing something to get your name out there and be known for something in this space, whether that's a podcast or your blog, or maybe you start a special interest group at work. Like I ran like a data science journal club at work, and be that person, whether it's at work or publicly, be that person that has a name for yourself here. And then the third thing I'd say is kind of like friendliness, networking. Like I think that you can have great skills, but sometimes it just helps to go say hi to someone or get coffee with them and really connect on a human level, because I think as robotic as this industry can feel sometimes, they're still hiring humans. So, and it's easy to see your potential when you really connect in real life.
Adding what Alfredo mentioned before, like I think nowadays, thanks to God, we see that more women are going to big tech. And
yeah.
Like, what is your experience being a woman in big tech?
Yeah, so I think it's been a pattern in my life that I'm often the only or one of very few women in the room. I think, being in science classes growing up and then doing engineering and now being in tech. So I think that there's a couple things. One, I have to give credit to my family because I grew up with two older brothers, and I was never treated like, oh, well, you're a girl, so you should do this and not do science. So I think I'm really fortunate that I was never made to feel different because I was a girl. It was kind of it was almost like the expectations were the same for my brothers and I. So I'm fortunate in that way. But I do think that you have to be comfortable with being the minority in the room. And I think it's important to be aware of your mindset for that, because either you can say, oh, I feel weird or I feel inferior and no one here looks like me. Or you can see it and try to frame it as an X factor where it's like, I'm the only person here that has this perspective or that stands out in this way. So I think you can try to use it to your advantage if you are sticking out like a sore thumb, which has been me on many occasions. But I do think it's really important to be known for your work. So if you're going to stand out as like the only girl in this meeting or on this team, then have your work shine so hard that now like it's even more noticeable. So yeah, I think it's about like developing a comfort and also having good mentors. Like it's really helpful to have female mentors that can help you navigate things. And just in general, I try to, I guess this is less specific to being a woman in tech, but I try to have like almost a squad of mentors that like fill different spaces for me. So I have one technical mentor that kind of helps me kind of if I'm having trouble with my code or if just want to talk about more technically where the industries are going and tools and things. So having a technical mentor has been helpful for me. Having an internal, almost political type mentor has been helpful for me. And that's always been a woman in my case, someone that maybe is a little more senior than you, but not your boss, that can help you understand the landscape of your company. And these are who the decision makers are. And this is what it takes to get promoted. And this is what's valued. So I try to have kind of a, like more of a personal / political mentor. And then one like career strategy mentor, which is for me, someone that doesn't work at my company that can help me imagine like, this is where I want my career to be in 10 years or like, these are the companies that have a good reputation, kind of thinking big picture. So I think that, especially, but bringing it back to the women in tech thing, if you have women that you can look up to that can help you navigate some of the challenges like specific to being a woman in tech, I think that can be really helpful because you will often be the only woman in the room. So just be prepared for that.
Really. And we appreciate that you are sharing these thoughts with us because obviously we come from different backgrounds and we don't get to see that as much. I'm getting to see that on my field right now and on my company. Like I feel like it's great because you guys bring a different perspective for like what me and Bruno could share. So completely agree with you in that sense.
And also I think regardless of gender, you were saying really important points of when you are learning, having different mentors, doesn't matter if you know, like having different people that can support you and can give you different type of knowledge. I think that's really key. And in this field is really important because I was asking you in the beginning how you transition with that business soft skills that made you like a complete data scientist. I think now that you were saying the technical people that are helping you, the political one, like all these different people that is involved, I think that's a key component of everything that you want to learn, not only data science. I think with everything, you need people that will give you like more things to your tool pack.
Absolutely.
Like I think that's really important when you're young and you're like a sponge, absorbing information of everyone. I think it's really good that you mentioned that to young people that want to learn and they have to listen. I think that's really good.
And it sounds super strategical that you have three. Like on my case, I've always had like one of our coach professors who I look up to him as a mentor. And you're saying that it's so good to have someone that you can rely upon on your concerns, on your career development, especially because right now big tech is changing so much. And also data science is growing so much because unfortunately like technology is a double-edged sword. It advances so fast and so much in such a short span of time that it's just very difficult to keep up with everything at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why I think it's great that you guys have so many different perspectives on your podcast. It allows you to open your mind. It like you said, Bruno, like it's important to be a sponge. And it's important to, I think, also get feedback from people, which is another helpful thing with the mentorship. Hopefully it's people that you trust that can give it to you straight and say, like, hey, that's not how you do it. And being open and humble enough to be willing to improve and pivot what you do.
True. And with all that we discussed, I think we can get a bit more glamorous. You obviously work on Google, which is one of the best big tech companies that there are. May we ask you, what does your day-to-day look like?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I'm in this, like I mentioned, kind of this consultative role right now. So I'd say a portion of it is working with companies, like actually at all different stages. Some of them are more early stage startups, some of them are large organizations, and specifically talking occasionally to their executives, but a lot of times to their IT teams and to their CTOs and their CIOs. And sometimes, a lot of times, the engineers as well, and kind of understanding what are the problems you're trying to solve? What does your current tech stack look like? And I think starting to develop a deep understanding of here's what their problems are, and then bring my lens of here's what is possible with AI and machine learning in Google Cloud, and then kind of start to assemble recommendations. Oftentimes we'll design architectures for them and say, here's the types of databases that you could store your work in, and here are the models you could feed it into, and here's how you could host it, and so on. So I'd say one component is this consultative piece. Another component is more building demos, building proof of concepts. So for example, I've been actually working with a lot of biotech companies lately that are trying to take data about different like protein sequences and predict like how those protein sequences will fold and what their functions will be. So sometimes we'll design a pipeline for like, hey, here's how you would load your protein sequences in, here's the model you would host, etc. So you want to be able to show them a proof of concept and show them a demo of how that might look. And then the next step is kind of any recommendations on implementation. Sometimes you go along that journey a little more, like a little further than other times with them. Sometimes you kind of just give the recommendation and then they take what they need and go. But yeah, so there's a portion of it that's designing demos and proof of concepts. And I've been really fortunate that there's actually a component as well where you get to speak at different events and kind of share any insights that you have. Like we had like an AI summit day at the Cambridge Google office. We had something similar in New York too. So it's really cool to be able to go there and share about the work that you're doing, share about capabilities on Google Cloud. So that's been exciting for me because I think as I continue to develop my career, I want to become a little bit more of a thought leader and be a person that has a perspective on some of this tooling. So yeah, those are kind of the three components, but it's super dynamic. Like you get to work with really interesting, smart, humble people. You're always learning. I mean, the field itself is always evolving, but then I think especially at Google, there's such an arsenal of tools and possibilities. So yeah, that's kind of a day in the life right now.
It sounds like a dream job. I'm honest with you.
We don't have any doubt that you're going to become that leader that you're mentioning. We have no doubt that you're going to become that without any doubt.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, Bruno. Maybe if I stick around with you guys, it seems like you guys are already thought leaders in this space.
I think the three of us, we are, and we're trying our best. But let me tell you, like, it does sound like you're like a dream job because you have this strategical part, you have this more technical component, and finally, you have this stakeholder communication that I feel brings overall like a really good tool stack to your own like professional development. And again, I'm really happy to hear that.
I also have one question. Like in this podcast, we always mention more that analyze the data analysis based on a business perspective. I think this is the first time someone mentioned how the data can be used in something like science. For example, exactly. Like I think that's the first time someone mentioned that, and I want to ask you, like, how different is to analyze data or give data to someone that is investigating like science, like biotech, like to, for example, a bank or an insurance company. Like, what is it? How big of a difference it is?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I have this experience with retail that is like not particularly a scientific space to be in. And now I'm in this place where I actually talk to a lot of like PhD scientists and researchers that are really deep in this stuff. So I think like in some ways, it requires a little bit more of a sophisticated understanding of what the business problem is. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I understand everything about the science that they're doing, but I do think it takes a little bit. It was more of a learning curve, at least for me, because now for each company that you talk to, you need to be able to talk the talk a little bit and understand what they're trying to do. So I think that in some ways, it's more complicated to understand their needs. But in other ways, like some of the, at least for model hosting, because right now a lot of what I do is like machine learning engineering and like pipeline engineering, almost like a data engineering role. So in some ways, when you zoom out and think about it from cloud architecture, like it's still similar where like you host the data here, you host the model here, you serve it here. So even if the model itself might require more mental energy to figure out how it would work, the overall process like is similar to what it would be if you're doing a risk management model or if you're doing a content recommendation model or something. So for me, it's just been a bit of a learning curve, and I'm fortunate that I come from this materials engineering background. So a lot of the lab techniques that they're using, like I have some exposure to them, which is helpful. But yeah, it's a different field. I think one thing that's been sort of cool for me is that it feels good to work with companies that are working on cancer drugs and Alzheimer's drugs and doing these things that genuinely are helping people. And that feels kind of nice because I mean, for years, I worked on things like targeted email marketing and like, oh, how can we get people to buy more stuff? Like, not again, very technically, like from a technical perspective, it was very stimulating and interesting for me. But it feels good to have that piece of, oh, this is also good for society.
And it's impactful, absolutely.
Yeah.
I ask you because my big sister that I admire, that she's my inspiration. She has a PhD in neuroscience, and I always like wonder how they manage the data, how it works when they are investigating stuff. And I think it's really cool that you mentioned all these components. But Meera, I have a question for you. If you never become a data scientist, what else are you going to try to become? What other profession do you see yourself doing if you never be into data science?
These are the heavy hitting questions, Bruno. So I actually have a lot of like side passions outside of data science. I try to have balance in my life. So one thing that I do is I teach fitness classes. There's a gym in Boston and actually all over the US called Equinox. So I teach cycle classes there. I'm starting to get into Pilates classes as well. So that's kind of my my side passion. I love being able to encourage people and kind of like help them feel good, help them feel like the best version of themselves. So I can imagine myself having gone more full-time down a path like that if I hadn't been so interested in this STEM stuff. So there's that. And I also am really into real estate investing. Like I have a few rental properties and I have done some renovation and flip projects. So I found that really fun. And I think that's kind of the engineer in me as well, to see something tangible and see potential in it and fix it up or change it. So I found that to be very rewarding as well. And it's, to me, I like it because it's sort of like entrepreneurship for average Joe. Like you don't have to be super sophisticated to be able to do it. It's not super hard to understand. It just takes some courage and some research. And some creativity sometimes with funding. So I can imagine myself following one of those paths. But I think that something that would be cool is maybe blending the interests together so that you have a real edge or a real alpha where, like, for example, what's the intersection of real estate and data science? And is there a way to maybe be able to take in housing data and anticipate trends or anticipate crashes? I don't know. I think there might be something cool there. And same with fitness too. I've seen a lot of people even just take data from their Apple Watches or their Pelotons and then apply some interesting statistical models there. So I think that maybe down the line, I might try to blend some of these interests together.
I think it's really important that you mentioned the balance of doing exercise. Fer and I, we always talk about you need to go to the gym or run to have the balance of being 8 or 10 or 11 hours in front of a computer, just coding, or seeing data or graphs or dashboards. You need that balance of, physical training too. And we always talk about that, how that's so important in this field to have balance in your life. I think it's awesome that you mentioned that. And also that you actually do it.
Yeah, I mean, health is wealth. And I think it's easy to overlook because you feel like, oh, well, if I work 16 hours a day, then I'll be better at what I do. But sometimes if you get the right amount of sleep, if you get the right nutrition and you exercise, you actually can show up to work with more zest and more energy. So I totally agree. I think it's really important, especially as we get older, it's hard to stay sharp if you're not kind of flexing your muscles, I think both mentally and physically.
Older? I mean, beautiful, super young. I don't know what you're talking about.
We are super young. That's true.
But yeah. No, but you bring a really good point that we wanted to ask you because obviously we also feel like you have such a heavy load on your shoulders and so much responsibilities of also working on one of the best companies that there are right now, right in the world. So I think that you bringing that balance to yourself, something that educates yourself with real estate, something that brings you physical training, I think that's great. And overall, I think that this has been a great interview. Yeah,
I think that was awesome because we cover every single topic about how to learn, how to get inspired, how it can be with business, how it's a balance with your life, and actually also doing data science, and how you can inspire women actually to be inside this field. And it doesn't matter if you're a minority or not, if you put the work and you're willing to do it, the sky is the limit. Meera,
I totally agree.
Thank you so much for your time tonight. Thank you so much for your time and your words. And we hope to see you again in this podcast.
Hopefully see you soon.
I will see you guys around. Thank you so much for having me, Bruno and Alfredo. And I have to say quickly, I love what you guys are doing. I think you bring a very conversational and engaging perspective to this space. I was telling you earlier, I listen to a lot of tech podcasts and data science podcasts, and they're informative, but I think that you both make it so approachable and make it so digestible. And of course, I mean, the only bilingual podcast, how incredible is that when we're talking about diversity? Look at the perspective that you both bring to the table, being international and having empowering Spanish speakers. I just think it's so awesome that you're doing this, and I'm so excited to see how it evolves.
Yeah, thank you so much. And everything that you said, we can summarize with data friendly. Seriously, thank you for that.
Thanks so much. And see you soon. Thanks so much.
See you soon. Thanks, guys.